Hello and welcome to the FintechWire Innovators Podcast. I'm Ed Medina and I'm the editor of FintechWire. In today's episode, we'll be examining the changing landscape for open banking services in the U.S. market. We'll also share some findings of Mastercard's small business survey on open banking and what use cases are driving adoption in the marketplace. To help us understand this technology, we're joined by Andy Sheehan, EVP of Open Banking North America at Mastercard. Andy, welcome to the show. Tell us about your role at Mastercard.
Ed, it's great to be with you today and with you, Jacob, as well. So I lead our U.S. and North America open banking business with Mastercard. I actually got into open banking 5 years ago, joining Finicity, which has now been a part of Mastercard for 3 years. And prior to that, I was in credit reporting with Experian for almost 20 years. So again, it's great to join you today and excited for our conversation.
Well, welcome, Andy, and thanks for joining us. Also with us today is Jacob Morgan, Financial Services Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Jacob, welcome to the show. Tell us a little more about your role at Forrester.
Thanks, Ed. So, I've been at Forrester for just over 8 years now and work within the financial services practice. I've been looking at open banking in various parts of the globe now for some time, as well as the future of payments and the future of banking, which are some of the other sort of things I have under my remit. And prior to Forrester, I spent just over 16 years working for Capital One here in the UK. So I've been around a little while in financial services and did have my fingers dirty before I became an analyst.
Great. Well, welcome to the show, guys. Jacob, can you help us set the context for this discussion? How do you see open banking evolving?
So it's an interesting one. I mean, open banking is essentially consumer permission consent to allow access to their data, often in a number of countries, but depending on the scope within a country, it will also include the option for payments initiation, where a firm can essentially request a payment from the bank that the customer banks with. Largely speaking, we've seen three sort of distinct shifts in open banking as it's matured in different countries. So if the US is anything like other territories, this is the sort of changes that we'll expect. The first really is there's often a shift from focusing on data solutions, so things like those consumer dashboards and those kind of one-stop shops that give you insight into your payment, into your expenditure. A shift from that into payments. That's often the first sort of main trend that we see. Obviously, this does depend very much on whether or not payments is part of the scope within a particular country, but it's partly because payments is a little harder than the sort of read-only access that's required for the data side of things. The second shift we tend to see is a shift from focusing on consumer solutions to focusing on business solutions. This is partly because businesses often have less sort of digital solutions. There's a huge focus on consumer-facing solutions. If you think of payments, things like mobile payments, it's all nice and slick. But when it comes to business solutions, it's very, very clunky. So the second focus we see is often moving from that consumer-facing open banking solutions to building solutions that businesses can work with. And then the third sort of shift is from what we call point solutions, where you're perhaps using an open banking API or open banking access for a particular purpose, to actually building end-to-end solutions. So this is really where you're actually delivering a solution which in part is using open banking in order to enable that end-to-end solution. And I think as well, the other thing is when you look at countries and regions like Europe and the UK, it started with the regulator. So it's really the regulator trying to drive competition into the marketplace and provide greater consumer choice. But this is now sort of very much drifting towards competitive market forces driving the solutions that we see in market. Whereas the US has actually come from the other angle. The US essentially started with market forces driving open finance, and now the regulators come out with a little bit more of a stick in order to sort of cement some of the competition that we would like to see as a result of open banking. But really, you do need a blend of both. You need a sort of relatively level playing field, which is where the regulator comes in, but also to accelerate uptake, you need a number of things in place that are going to drive value for both the businesses and the customers that are using the solutions, and also the banks and the other financial services firms that are providing those solutions.
Excellent. Thanks, Jacob. Andy, how do you see open banking and its evolution?
Yeah, I think, Jacob, it was a good setup. I mean, starting with the fact that it's unique. It's consumer permissioned data at its core, and the whole point of open banking is for consumers and small businesses to own and put their data to work to uplift their financial lives. At Mastercard, we absolutely see open banking as a new and emerging network. So it's a network that has consumers and small businesses at the center, and then there's the data sources, typically financial institutions, and then the applications, which could be banks themselves, that consumers and small businesses interact with for digital experiences. So it's a new network, and it's maturing rapidly. So that's how I would characterize it in the U.S. It's on the demand side, I think the adoption of open banking is really driven by just the insatiable demand of consumers and small businesses for faster, digital, more convenient financial experiences. I go back to the 70s when I was, listening to my parents talk about how amazing ATM networks are. You can just get your money like magic. And I think that, in the financial ecosystem, open banking is a big sea change. So on the demand side, there's consumers and small businesses engaging and really wanting and embracing these experiences. On the supply side, the maturation of the availability of the data through next generation APIs, reliable, secure technology is maturing rapidly itself. Just 3 years ago, when I remember the first direct connection API with a financial institution here in the U.S. And that's gone from, today, a majority of our volume in Mastercard's U.S. open banking network flows over these next generation APIs. So a tremendous amount of investment and, really, back to the word maturity, is being infused into open banking today. I would say that, and I think that there's a lot of investment on the fintech application, traditional lender side on these use cases for open banking. So a lot of competition for digital experiences from challengers and incumbent players in financial services, really using these digital experiences as a point of differentiation. Jacob, really align with you on those trends where, what was, 10, 15 years ago, personal financial management dashboards, now moving into payments. We were excited to announce a partnership with JP Chase to enable bill payments enabled by open banking. Lending is a core use case. That's actually where our Finicity business pre-Mastercard got its start. And I think there's kind of this next generation of beyond dashboards, insights, analytics overlaid on the data that is really exciting.
It is exciting. Thank you, Andy. Guys, for our next question, I'd like to talk about opportunities. Jacob, how do you see open banking creating opportunities for U.S. banks to serve their customers?
So I think it really is about enabling you to take your products and services to customers rather than making them come to you. So it really does sort of turn the telescope around in terms of how you perhaps view your customers and, can create solutions for them. And as Andy was saying, it's gone way beyond the personal financial management dashboards. It's not just about getting access to the data. It's about the insights that you offer. It's, you have to offer more. It's about identifying things like spare cash that you can potentially squirrel away or save, or things like dormant subscriptions that by cancelling them can save you money. So it's things that actually put the customer and their financial well-being, their financial health, and their financial understanding right at the heart of what they're actually doing with their finances. And it's that embedded banking service as well. I mean, this is one of the fundamental things around, APIs. I mean, they really are transforming the way that businesses can build these connected ecosystems and these collaborative ecosystems. It's also recognizing that it's a two-way street. So it's not just simply, right, I now have to provide access to my customers' data. The fact that every bank in the country will be doing that means that you potentially, with your customers' permission, have access to their data in other accounts. So you can build a far more complete and holistic view of a customer's financial position, and that can lead to far greater ability to manage them more effectively, to segment them in real time, to be able to serve them with nuanced products that financially meet their needs, or give them access to sort of lending where perhaps you weren't able to in the past. You no longer will be relying purely on a FICO score. Now you can get real-time insight into exactly what a financial sort of level of health the customer has, which helps with affordability, not just managing risk, but also enabling them to manage their finances far more accurately. So there's a whole host of sort of opportunities, and that's just on the customer side. On the business side, it's all about enabling businesses to use their own ERP solutions, but embed access to the general ledger or the account or the banking platform, potentially payments initiation within their own platforms. So, that creates great efficiencies for them. It enables, their own staff to stay within consistent interfaces that they're familiar with. There's a whole host of opportunity that this can unlock, but it really is all about sort of collaborative and connected platform business models, really, and this being on the, enabling or lowering the barriers to attaining this kind of approach.
Thank you, Jacob. And Andy, how do you see open banking creating opportunities for banks and their customers?
Yeah, I think for open banking, it's not kind of a point solution. So, when we're engaging with banks, I think the opportunity is for banks to leverage open banking, capabilities. So consumer permission data across the full life cycle of a consumer customer or small business customer. So, I'm opening an account, leveraging open banking data to, verify Andy Sheehan's account that is being used to fund that new account. I'm now applying for a financial product, whether it's a credit card or a loan, to leverage the open banking data to drive more insights, to make a smarter offer or a better offer to a consumer, or to pull a consumer or small business into a bank that otherwise wouldn't have been a customer based on additional insights. So there's there's an inclusion aspect of open banking, of pulling additional parties into the financial ecosystem. And then, and then downstream, it's us as customers of financial institutions, being smarter and more agile around, our financial situation and opportunities. So I think the opportunity for banks and is to better support their consumers, across the board, and small business as well. And I think all those scenarios, you can see two sides of it. It's good for the bank, and really it's good for the bank because it's making a better experience, more opportunities ultimately for their end customers. So I think I would say that in traditional financial services, it's still relatively early days. I think that journey, the clients that we work with, they're certainly focused on it, and taking action. But maybe back to your earlier question, Ed, it's what's the state today? It's maturing rapidly, but it's not there yet.
Speaking of early days, Andy, how do you see the rollout going for open banking in the U.S.? Are banking customers catching on to the possibilities of open banking?
Yeah, absolutely catching on, more than catching on. Taking action, integrating to our services and our APIs, for instance, and aggressively piloting solutions with test and learn across all the use cases that myself and Jacob are referencing. It's certainly with large banks, these are big initiatives. So very, very measured approach. But I think certainly seeing results and moving forward.
Thanks, Andy. And Jacob, what are your thoughts on how the rollout's going in the U.S. and how it's catching on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, certainly we see the US almost starting from a point ahead of open banking. It's almost like the US is reverse engineering into open banking, because there's already been, quite a vibrant community of open banking intermediaries that allow you to, provide your data to dashboard solutions and PFM solutions. We've had a number of providers in market that have been offering those sorts of services for some time. And also, you're coming from an environment where screen scraping enables accessibility to financial data, whereas we didn't really have that in Europe, for example. And the use of APIs gave a lot of customers the first opportunity to really explore some of those solutions. So US consumers are actually starting from a position where they're already familiar with open finance, essentially, which is going beyond open banking requirements into other financial products, not merely sort of retail bank accounts. So and we certainly know from Forrester's data that US consumers are pretty much, they're not the most willing to share data, but they are almost the most willing to share data on the planet. There's already, quite a large willingness to do that, way more than we see in some of the European countries, for example. So customers are quite happy to provide their data for, potentially better value financial products. I mean, cheaper rates or cheaper access to loans is one of the strong use cases. But it's also about, sharing data or sharing access to data to make their lives easier. So, to Andy's point, the ability to automate the onboarding process or the application process for another financial product by using the trusted data from your bank, for example. We've done some forecasting based on European uptake of open banking, and it's quite an interesting picture, because what I would say is that a lot of the press is relatively negative, for want of a better word, where essentially saying, well, Europe, it's had it since 2018. There's not much adoption. The reality is that, we rebased the take-up of mobile payments, the take-up of mobile banking solutions, and the take-up of open banking. And if you start them all at year zero, open banking is actually slightly ahead of mobile payments and some of the other, and open and mobile banking solutions. So I don't think anyone's sitting here today saying that uptake of those solutions has been disappointing. So there really is genuine customer interest and desire to have their lives made easier, or the insight to help them manage their financial situation more effectively. But just taking the pain out of some of these processes, things like applying for a mortgage and having to provide, paper-based statements, that's rapidly become a thing of the past in Europe because of open banking and the access that customers can now do in a secure and sort of consent-managed way by providing access to their raw bank data, essentially.
Thanks, Jacob. We'll come back to data in a moment, but first, I wanted to ask you guys about the CFPB's proposed regulatory framework for open banking. Andy, how do you see this influencing the already existing efforts that you've mentioned for open banking?
Yeah, and I think that as Jacob mentioned, in the U.S., there's been a very active industry-led, rollout of open banking. So, and Mastercard has been a big part of that with the financial data exchange in terms of driving standards and adoption. So, I think we're very supportive of the 1033 regulations because it aligns with our belief that consumers own their data and they should be able to put it to work for themselves. So the proposed rules themselves just were just published. So certainly we're reviewing those carefully and drilling down into what the implications are.
Thanks, Andy. And Jacob, there are already open banking rules in Europe. So what do you think about the rules that were proposed in the US last month?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely make a lot of sense, and the feel I get from my conversations with people in the US industry are really sort of quite positive, because I think they're recognizing that the regulator has listened to feedback and is moving forward in a considered way. They are pulling in learning from other countries, whether that's or regions, whether that's Europe, whether that's what's happened in Brazil. They are genuinely consulting broadly. I mean, the fact that there is another sort of month to run from where we are now before this round of consultation finishes, again, demonstrates their willingness to take in multiple views. And I think they're also sensitive to some of the genuine challenges out there. This isn't something that is free. It might end up being free for the end customer who is the main beneficiary of all of this, of course. But, everybody within the industry has to put some investment into making this happen. And that cost will be borne in different ways according to the size of organizations. And that's, again, something that is recognized by the regulator, the challenge that smaller organizations potentially will have a disproportionate cost to bear, or have a more limited choice in terms of where and how they can turn to providers to build some of these solutions for them, because they just simply won't have the luxury of large software studios or technology shops that can build the solutions for them that the larger banks have, for example. So I do think the regulator's moving forward in a very, very measured way. And also, to Andy's point, that the sentiment in the industry over the last sort of 12, 18 months has shifted broadly towards positivity towards this. There's finally a recognition that, ultimately the customer benefits, and you have to be present when in the ecosystems and the products that your customers are using, merely to be available to them. If you're not there, they simply won't be able to use you. So there is an inevitability to this, but I think there's also a positivity that's swinging behind it.
That's a good analogy, Jacob. Guys, perhaps we can return to the subject of data and what it can allow for enhanced services and customer relationships for those implementing open banking. Jacob, you mentioned that one of the key trends is toward complexity, moving from consumer to business needs and toward partnership solutions rather than just point solutions. So, Jacob, can you elaborate on what this data can or will allow?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if I take, say, some of the solutions that we've seen springing up in the UK, for example, if you're looking to rent an apartment now, you pretty much will use open banking to provide access to your bank information so that the rental agency can check your income, check your ability to meet regular payments, and do that within seconds. So you're no longer manually having to, give them several bank statements. Some banks and mortgage companies go even further. They've created kind of house share apps where open banking is used to provide a way of multiple people that are sharing a rental to pool their money so that they can sort of pay in their share of the bills, and that can come out of a centralized account. Also, they can send reminders to each other, and they can use the dashboard sort of features of personal financial management to stay on top of the household position. Exactly the same sort of open banking payments and data access is used by the same mortgage provider to provide services for landlords. So it's not just the tenants, the people renting the properties that can benefit. It's also the landlords who might have multiple properties that they're renting out with multiple accounts, one for each property. They can now bring this all together in a single dashboard. And, we're also seeing in places like Australia, where you have the consumer data right, for example, some of the open APIs and the open data capabilities that are now available have enabled business solutions, small and medium-sized business solutions, to be created that essentially are offering you a kind of ERP light solution, which previously would have cost you or been prohibitively costly. You as a small business would not have been able to afford the sorts of solutions that medium and large size firms can get off the shelf. Whereas now you can actually build some of these capabilities on top of open banking access and open banking payments. And it's when you start to string these things together. There's a bank in Europe, for example, Deutsche Bank, which strings together open banking payments with request to pay services, so they can create an invoice presentment and settlement service. So it becomes a tool for small businesses to enable invoice payments and to automate and remove some of the error, the areas where errors can enter in or delays can enter in when businesses are paying them. So you're starting to see these sort of end-to-end solutions created, building on the APIs and stringing together, solutions from perhaps multiple areas. There's a solution for payments now around open banking payments purely for the airline industry. Very niche, very bespoke, but gives the airline industry exactly what it needs in an open banking context. So we're starting to see that sort of breakout from, dashboard solutions, PFM solutions, into things that provide genuine utility and are ultimately solving a consumer or a business need. Providing merchants with greater accuracy in targeting customers, for example, because they can see the previous purchases that a customer has made. This is all enabled through that open banking access and being able to, for a customer, being able to provide access to their accounts so that others can understand far more, with far more depth, where and how they're spending their money, for example.
Thanks, Jacob. Those are great examples. Andy, how does Mastercard balance business and consumer needs when just approaching the data itself?
Yeah, I mean, certainly at Mastercard, we have strong governance and data rights, for the benefit of the consumer, principles that we apply globally. So I think the what's important to us is at the time that the consumer is permissioning their data, they have transparency to how the data is going to be used, and then we have governance and processes internally to ensure that we live up to that and protect the data. On the data, on the uses of the data, it's a real exciting time, in terms of not just the data, but the solutions that are being built on top of the data. Even a basic use case of leveraging open banking to verify a consumer's income and employment around a rental app or mortgage app. The evolution of the analytics to zero in on a consumer, for instance, their gig income. Maybe they've got a couple part-time jobs, and to really synthesize that and make that available to our clients as part of the app is exciting. On the payments enablement side, clients turn to us to leverage consumer permission data to verify who's the account owner and to provide the account details for ACH payments largely. We were really excited to launch a value-added service around smart payment decisioning. So to be able to tell a client that, hey, Andy Sheehan, he runs a tight cash flow and balance. He gets paid on Thursday, so why don't you bill him on Friday instead of on Tuesday? That's really good for our clients, and obviously it's very good for consumers. So we've got a what we call our payment success indicator that is overlaid on top of our core open banking services. I think that open banking isn't in a vacuum either. So I talked about open banking being a new and emerging network within Mastercard. We have an identity network as well to protect consumers and small businesses from fraud. So recently we embedded our identity capabilities within our open banking network to really just lift all ships and protect the consumers who are engaging within our open banking network. It's interesting. We've got we survey consumers and small businesses on open banking, and in our report, over 8 out of 10 consumers link their account for some purpose, the use cases that we've been talking about. But actually less than half of the consumers could really would be able to articulate open banking as a capability or service. So I think that's an area where more education, more just more engagement. It's an area that we're certainly focused on.
Thanks, Andy. That survey was great, by the way. And for our listeners, we have a link to the Mastercard Small Business Survey embedded with this podcast tease and on the FintechWire website. Andy, for our next question, are there any lessons or opportunities that you, in the way that different markets operate around the world, are adopting open banking? And how might that impact the U.S. market?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a global open banking team, at Mastercard. So there's not a week that goes by where we're not sharing experiences and leveraging synergies across our business. So from a regulatory standpoint, certainly other parts of the world have kind of started more from a regulated standpoint. So we're working with our counterparts as new regulations are proposed in the U.S. to make sure that we're managing through that process appropriately. Maybe in a more concrete way, we're building out capabilities in other parts of the world that that we're excited to be kind of importing and leveraging within the U.S. So, Jacob, as you may know, Australia has some pretty robust requirements in and around the consent management area, and those are some capabilities, some software applications that have been built for that market that we're excited to be leveraging in the U.S.
Thank you for that, Andy. And Jacob, what do you think is coming our way in the U.S. for open banking?
So I think there will be a steady recognition that open banking isn't as such a thing on its own. Andy kind of alluded to this earlier on. It doesn't exist in isolation. Really, it is all about consumers knowing, with whom, where, and for what purpose their data is being used. And that's really, giving a level of transparency to customers about, how many firms are using their data and giving them control over it. So it's very much around that sort of control aspect. But the way in which that happens will ultimately become more and more transparent. If I'm making a payment, I don't necessarily know or give two hoots, to be honest, whether it goes down the faster payments rail or ACH, or whether it's a wire transfer or whether it's using the open banking route. Ultimately, the payment just arrives. And I think over time, people will start to see open banking as more of the same thing. It's another tool in your toolbox to enable you to build solutions that, return value and have a meaningful role to play in your customers' lives. That's ultimately what all of this is about. It's about building customer-centric solutions that place the customer at the center of the benefits that people are able to achieve for them. So I do think that it's more about there's a lot of places you can look for inspiration. You can look to Brazil, you can look to Europe, you can look to Australia, but it is also about not just open banking, but open finance, and beyond that, open data. So the same sort of customer consent and permissioned principles will be rolled out, as indeed they're already being rolled out in Australia through the consumer data right, giving customers much more control over their entire footprint, not just their financial footprint. So, start to think now about the kind of exciting, mashups that you'll be able to create between financial data and data from utilities in the future, to look at everything from your own personal carbon footprint through to, the most effective supply that you can get for your utilities, for example. When you start to look at that as a business or a small business, you can start to do some really smart and intelligent forecasting and mapping that will be able to save you a lot of money in the future going forward. So it really is about using open banking and some of these principles and some of the data access principles to put power back in the hands of consumers. But beyond that, this is part of an open data movement. So, there's a lot more sort of exciting integrations and sort of collective cross-industry solutions that certainly, we predict we'll see within the next sort of decade or so.
Thanks, Jacob. And Andy, any thoughts on where open banking is headed in the U.S.?
In terms of where open banking is going, I think that I think the analytics will continue to grow and mature and solidify, for lack of a better word. I think that as I mentioned, 20 years in credit reporting, you guys know the credit scores that are used, standards, I think in terms of interpreting open banking data from a cash flow underwriting standpoint, from a payment prediction standpoint, I'm excited about what lies ahead in terms of the industry kind of rallying around some consistent analytics for that, and the industry's working hard on that right now. I think I agree with Jacob that the open banking we already certainly pull in or aggregate, consumer permission data that goes well beyond just checking accounts, right? It's investment accounts, liability accounts. So I think that will continue to expand to other important, products and data sets that are important to our financial lives as consumers and as businesses, right? So how about tax information and education information, employment information that is, resident within payroll companies. I'm excited for the future. I think that this movement of consumers taking control of and really managing their data is just going to expand from here.
And if I may, I'd just like to come in with one thing on that, because I do think that it's not so much consumer education. That's not where the education is needed. I think where the education primarily is needed is actually in building data literacy within firms themselves, because fundamentally the availability of access to data with customers' permission and the role of data in what you can now do within your business or potentially across multiple industries in that more open data future, in the same way that digital rapidly became part of everybody's job, data is going to become part of everyone's fundamental job and responsibility. So I do think that actually building awareness of open data and open financial data and data literacy within firms, not just banks, but all sorts of firms, is going to become more and more critical going forward.
Thank you, Jacob. And Andy, for our last question, what do you see as the role of open banking for the future in the financial world, perhaps 5 or 10 years out?
Yeah, I think I touched on some of this, Ed. I think in your horizon of 5 years, I think we will, I'm in this business, but, so I've got to be an optimist, but I think we'll get to ubiquity, where we as consumers and small businesses, for the right value proposition, securely permission our data, and we know what we're going to get for it. And I don't think we're not at that point yet. I think that the experiences and value propositions in return are gonna are it's almost hard to imagine it. If you think of what's come to market over the last 2-3 years in terms of technology innovations and the way that we can each leverage our data in the U.S. 5 years from now, so excited to envision what those experiences will be in and around payments and access to financial products and just insight and alerts to help me and us as consumers continue to improve our financial lives. So ubiquity and more use cases and value. I think we're going to see more. I think the inclusion and inroads into the financial ecosystem for consumers and small businesses will continue to strengthen. And open banking, I think, is a big driver of that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Andy. And Jacob, final thoughts on the future for open banking?
So I think it's similarly got a very positive future, but just to zero in on what Andy was saying there, value is the really key and important thing. It's not simply a case of build it and they will come. Ultimately, you have to provide value for customers, not necessarily value as in value for money, but value as in this takes time out of my daily life because it's now easier for me to do this particular process. And certainly what we've seen in Europe and Brazil and other places is it's often those utility use cases where, it's making it easier for somebody to do something, or it's removing overheads in terms of, businesses no longer having to spend time on reconciliation because they're able to automate some of the processes behind, their day-to-day operations using open data access and open banking. I think it's that sort of value that you need to drive at, because it's not just a case of offering up a dashboard. You have to actually provide some insight and some value on top of that. And I also think that in 5 years' time, the US will have realized that payments needs to be part of the scope, because that allows you to turn from insight into action. And that, I think, is where the real value starts to come. It's not just a case of, we can alert you to this, but you can then actually convert that to an action and move your money or make a payment or reconcile something automatically within that end-to-end experience. And I think there's, without payments in scope, and I know it's not an easy thing to add back into the scope, I do think there's some of the promise and some of the value, some of the opportunity is being left on the table. I think over time, it will naturally be brought into scope by innovators, many of whom are in fact already doing that, but it may well be brought into scope from a regulatory perspective. And I haven't got any lines to the regulator here. I'm not getting any sort of insider information, but I just think that it's at the moment it's a bit of a missed opportunity.
Well, thank you, Jacob, and we'll certainly keep an eye out for that. And guys, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thanks for hosting us, Ed. Jacob, it was a pleasure.
We release new Innovators podcasts every week at FintechWire. We're also on Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and Podbean. You can find links to all of this as well as transcripts at FintechWire /podcasts. So check back for new episodes, and we appreciate you listening.